The following has been reproduced from selected historical cases in abnormal dreaming, edited by Kurt B. Maxwell, 1978. Editorial headnote. The following case is included for its documentary value rather than for the completeness of its clinical resolution. The material survives in three distinct forms: a published medical report, fragmentary unpublished clinical memoranda, and a remainder of patient-authored notes. No single source is sufficient on its own, and none can be treated as authoritative. The case is presented here as an instance in which abnormal dreaming is characterized not by affective disturbance or symbolic elaboration, but by persistence, internal coherence, and progressive alteration in conditions of access. Readers are cautioned against imposing retrospective diagnostic categories or interpretive frameworks not warranted by the surviving evidence. Particular attention is invited to the manner in which the phenomenon concludes. Unlike many historical cases in which recurrent dream material culminates in intrusion upon waking life or psychiatric deterioration, the present case appears to terminate without crisis or declared loss. Whether this reflects resolution, adaptation, or an inadequacy of the record cannot be determined. The editorial decision to include the case rests on its resistance to explanation. It serves less to illustrate a theory than to delineate the limits of existing ones. Case 11, the Hargreave case, Boston, 1900. Introduction and sources. The present case is reconstructed from a limited and uneven body of surviving material. These consist of 1. A published clinical report by Ronald Simons, M.D., appearing in the Boston Medical and Surgical Journal in February 1901, 2. Several fragments of unpublished clinical memoranda among Simons' private papers, and 3. A set of undated notes attributed to the patient himself, identified therein as Jonathan Hargreave. The patient memoranda require particular comment. Family correspondence preserved with the surviving leaves indicates that the notes were originally more extensive, and that a substantial portion was destroyed shortly after the patient's disappearance by a private party acting without professional supervision. No inventory of the destroyed material exists, and no reliable description of its contents has been preserved. The notes discussed below therefore represent only a remainder of an unknown whole. For this reason, the case is presented not as a diagnostic unity but as a documentary convergence of partial perspectives. The absence of material is treated here as a condition of the record rather than as evidence in itself. The interest of the case lies not in its conformity to any established syndrome, but in the unusual persistence, internal coherence, and apparent functional development of a single dream environment over several months. While recurrent dreams are common, the present material suggests a phenomenon that exceeds repetition and approaches continuity. Summary of the published clinical account. Simons' published report concerns a 32-year-old male clerk who came under observation in August 1900 with symptoms then commonly subsumed under the diagnosis of neurasthenia, including mental fatigue, anxiety, and disordered sleep. Physical examination was negative, and no hereditary or toxic factors were elicited. The patient remained capable of employment throughout most of the observation period. The principal feature of the case was a dream occurring nightly with little variation, described as an extensive interior structure composed of rooms and corridors. The dream was notably neutral in effect and devoid of symbolic or narrative content. Interruption of sleep did not terminate the experience. Upon resumption, the patient reported returning to the same environment. During September, the patient produced written descriptions and diagrams, which Simons found to be consistent across time. In October, the patient reported an increase in vividness and the presence of an additional element within the dream, which he described cautiously and without elaboration. This was followed by an acute but transient physical illness of undetermined cause. The dream persisted for several weeks thereafter and then ceased abruptly in December. Following cessation, the the patient's anxiety diminished and sleep improved, though Simons observed a mild but persistent attenuation of effect. Observation ended when the patient removed himself from supervision. Simons offers no theoretical interpretation, submitting the case as an instance of persistent dream activity associated with neurasthenic symptoms. Unpublished clinical memoranda. The unpublished memoranda complicate the published account in several respects. Simons expresses early doubt that fatigue alone can account for the phenomena observed, noting that while repetition is unremarkable, continuity is not. He repeatedly emphasizes the patient's stable orientation, conservative self-correction, and absence of symbolic elaboration. By late September, Simons records the patient's reluctance to enter certain previously traversed corridors, described by the patient as no longer empty. The patient declines to clarify further, and his effect remains unchanged. Simons also notes a brief but deliberate shift in pronoun usage during description, corrected without confusion. When Simons attempts to frame the material in psychoanalytic terms, the patient rejects this interpretation with unusual firmness, stating that it was not that kind of place, a phrase later repeated verbatim. Following the October illness, Simons observes a change in the patient's relation to the dream. Entry is now described as volitional. Diagrammatic recording is abandoned as unnecessary, orientation having become implicit. The patient acknowledges extended intervals spent in the presence of others within the dream environment but refuses specification, stating that description would be misleading. A single instance of an apparently anticipatory statement regarding events at the patient's workplace is recorded in November. Simons explicitly cautions against interpretation, attributing the correspondence to chance in the absence of repetition. In December, the patient reports cessation of the dream, stating that return is no longer possible, a condition he does not describe as loss. Affect remains attenuated but stable. The patient subsequently fails to attend follow-up and cannot be located. Patient memoranda. The surviving notes attributed to Hargreave describe the dream environment from within, employing a language that is procedural rather than emotional. The environment is consistently interior in character and navigated by walking. Orientation is achieved through prior passage rather than overview. The whole is never apprehended at once. Rooms and corridors recur with regularity. Shelving appears in many rooms, described in functional terms without symbolic attribution. Illumination is constant and without visible source. The prevailing impression is of use without use being specified. As the notes progress, selective alterations appear. Certain passages become inaccessible without visible sign of alteration. Repeated traversal hastens restriction, while variation preserves access. Attention and comprehension themselves appear implicated. Rooms recalled too clearly upon waking become more difficult to reach thereafter. As one note puts it, I record this here because it was recorded at the time, although it does not alter the arrangement already described. The environment is described as being exhausted not by use, but by comprehension. Later entries record a shift from indifference to a form of anticipatory correction, in which movement is guided before error occurs. Hargreave explicitly rejects interpretations involving personality or intention, characterizing the effect as administrative rather than expressive. Recurrence gives way to what he terms completion. Record-keeping itself is abandoned on the grounds that record implies remainder. The notes conclude without distress and with a clear intention to cease observation. Given the acknowledged destruction of additional material, it cannot be determined whether the surviving notes represent a truncation imposed from without or a conclusion arrived at by the author. The internal logic of the extant notes, however, is consistent with the latter. Comparative considerations. Across all three sources, several features recur with notable stability. internal coherence, affective neutrality, progressive alteration in conditions of access, and termination without crisis. The phenomenon develops functionally rather than symbolically and appears responsive to modes of engagement rather than emotional content. The patient's waking alteration is attenuative rather than disruptive, involving diminished emphasis rather than confusion, exaltation, or withdrawal. No single interpretive framework available at the time of observation adequately accounts for the totality of the material. At the same time, the case does not require recourse to metaphysical explanation. The anticipatory elements are sparse, isolated, and explicitly minimized by the clinician himself. What remains is a structured anomaly, a dream that behaves less like an episode and more like a system, and that concludes without evident residue. Conclusion. This case is presented not as evidence for a particular theory, but as a challenge to prevailing assumptions regarding dreaming as inherently episodic, symbolic, and affect-laden. In at least one historical instance, the abnormal dream neither intrudes upon waking life nor escalates into disorder. Instead, it persists, alters its conditions of access, and concludes itself. That this conclusion coincides with loss of material and disappearance of the patient cannot be confidently interpreted as causally related. The surviving record permits only the observation that the phenomenon did not fragment, dramatize, or declare itself. It ended. In the absence of further documentation, the case must stand as it remains, partial, restrained, and resistant to both explanation and embellishment.